Matt, you want to put Matt? Matt?
I'm going to send it to the IIW.
You want to put it in the corner, in the shade in the corner?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Well, that means it goes on the public web, right?
Yeah, so this will be on the web publicly.
And I'm not going to need to go because I don't want to be part of that.
You were going to talk about pen names. The stuff that I was planning on diving into is a little different, which is sort of pseudonyms, but there's kind of a more detailed architecture that I'm thinking about specifically, and I'm interested both in having people able to keep separate pseudonyms separate, as well as have reputation associated with a pseudonym across multiple domains be accessible. So that kind of gets to a certain level of technicality, and I don't know where your conversation was going. So I'll let you start.
Well, so what I wanted to hear more of, like, is of the people that talk, who's interested in kind of like the implications of having his project work out technically. Like, let's say we assume that the technical aspects actually work, where you have a pseudonym and you can maintain separate identities. I would actually want to know more about the thought process around controlling.
Well, you want to know what it is you want to do, rather than how to do it.
Yes. So I see his as an implementation of it, and mine as like what it is that should be implemented.
But you asked a different question as well, a name I can abandon.
Yes,
And that's
that too.
different from what Matt was talking about.
Right.
But there's a thread that ties them, which is that there are various actors, we'll call them, who, when you interact, are so deeply in the background interacting with you as to get your machine name. You know, they get your IP address, get your machine, and they can, and if they really, if they really want to get deeply into it, they can see in your machine further. They can do like an autopsy of you before you've died, to know that you are Fred, Jack, Sam, Susan, and Alice. Whenever, from this machine. And I read somewhere about the machines that can track your every keystroke can also determine if it's the same person using the keyboard.
It's a very good biometric.
So
Yeah.
I think it's really interesting to talk about pseudonyms and progressive disclosure and deniability and all these kinds of things without yet getting into the vulnerabilities that exist and the fact that true pseudonymity is very difficult to achieve in the field. I'd really like to have that conversation, even though I agree with what you just said.
But it means also that me as an outsider not running the website, and you as an outsider not running the website, we can maintain pseudonymity between us because we don't have access to that kind of information when we interact. So it's an interesting question without considering this.
So I guess my question is, do we want to have
I'm interested
separate?
I'm interested in
Oh, okay.
Me too.
Oh, okay.
I was having to choose which one I was going
Right,
to.
that's why I was like, why don't you take the floor first,
Okay.
and then we can talk about the ideas that come out.
This is a bare bones website that I put up several years ago, which I offer to any of you who want to have a cool place to blog about this topic. I'd be happy to set up a blog and make you all authors or whatever
With
you
our
want.
pseudonyms?
Say again?
Can we
Make
use
us
it?
all-
Yeah, you have to use a pseudonym though. You can't use your real. No, I'm kidding. That's my real names policy. You must not use your.
All right, so I'll start with kind of the why. So this session, basically, my session got proposed over lunch, basically, or at the end of the session just before lunch. I pulled Terry aside and I said, hey, can I pick your brain? There's a thicket kind of on the edge of stuff that I've been thinking about for a long time, and I know there's some thorny issues there, but I haven't really dove into them. And the basic gist of it is, I've been trying to figure out how do you enable an individual to leverage the insights and efforts of others, the others that are willing to let them access them, while being constrained by the preferences of those others, and with the assumption that I want to use the interactions within the system itself to do most of the to pull the bulk of the weight on the regulatory front, not relying on an external legal structure and those enforcement mechanisms, but basically reputation within this digital network. I won't call it a community because I think there are communities within that network where people are actually communicating with one another, but that sort of ecosystem. So the basic structure of this thing looks something like this. So if I'm Matt and I have a resource, that resource is the ability to make my phone ring, to unlock my door, some piece of code, a recipe, whatever. But I've got some, let's say it's digital resource, because any of those things you're actually using some code to do. So I've got some digital resource, and it's available, but I'm making it available on the basis of somebody satisfying a criteria. So I'm not giving it to everyone, I'm giving it only to people who satisfy some set of criteria. That criteria could be that they paid, that they're upstanding members of a specific community, etc. But something along those lines. So then you've got I've got a number of different places that I'm willing to accept reputation information from to satisfy this criteria. And we've got Alan over here who wants my digital resource. He wants this thing. And the question that I asked Terry was, how do I structure it so that when he shows up and says, hey, I want this, I say, your reputation's not good enough, you got to satisfy this, come back with later, and he submits that other reputation. How do I structure this in a way where I don't end up taking both of those and tying them together, and I suddenly now know that he is the same person? And our little conversation just before lunch, we kind of mapped out sort of how you might be able to do that. And it's that you don't have him submit in the first place, right? You basically say, he sends a ping anonymously saying, oh, hey, what you got? What are the rules of the game? To access this, what sorts of reputation are you willing to accept, and how much do I have to have? And then he's able to inspect his own pseudonyms that he has, his profiles, and go, well, I could use this one. Or generate a new one. But if he generates a new one, that new one is not likely to have any reputation history that will satisfy my.
The reason that I said that is that I thought part of where you were going was how you could make that reputation. What's the mathematical term?
So you're
commutative?
Yes.
Something like that?
Terry ended up pointing out something along those lines as well, and we stumbled on that. Like I'll get to that in just a second.
So Castaway a couple of years ago here at IAW presented a protocol where you could prove you were a member of some group without revealing anything else.
Yeah.
Right. And so I could prove to you that I'm a member of the group with a good reputation at this agency without proving anything else. And it's all purely crypto protocol. So that's been covered.
And Henrik ends up kind of advocating on behalf of a lot of things along those lines, right? Prove that I am over 21, not that I am 36, right? That you only need this much information. But Terry and I got into that part of the conversation as well, and what it brought me back to immediately was that doesn't solve what this whole ecosystem is supposed to try to solve, which is if you take this, and I've got some rules associated with it, and you violate those, that I have some recourse. I have an ability to ping that, leave bad feedback for that thing in a way where this has some amount of value, and you might have to abandon that profile, and thus all the currency that was encapsulated therein.
So this is like the digital money protocol that's anonymous until you double spend.
Yeah. So
blockchain will fix it.
Sure.
Oh dear.
Putting the
Oh
block.
dear. We found the meme.
So without we're a little bit in the weeds, but so I've got this digital resource. You want it. You say, hey, what are the rules of the game? What are my options for presenting credentials to you that'll be good enough? And I say, well, here's the ones that I'll take. You basically look at your set of profiles that you have. You pick one of them that's going to satisfy that criteria, and you go to the reputation broker. I know you guys have in the IAW community, and especially with UMA and OA, there are specific names for all of these parties, but you go to the person who holds that reputation, and you take some information from me, this individual transaction key. You send that here and ask them to send me the indicator that this profile has this reputation, right?
You just described the PayPal transaction program.
Did I?
So PayPal, in this case, this site, you're wanting to spend money on this site.
Sure.
So they give you a token, you submit that to PayPal, and PayPal says it's something.
But the focus that I have here is on this not just being PayPal, but any.
No, I understand that.
Yeah.
But the point is
and any
that,
combination there.
that as long as you can get the public keys for the reputation broker, then the dance, the ceremony is the same.
Right. But here the key part is you have an initial negotiation over which reputation broker you both have in common. Right?
Yeah.
And you want to do that without exposing the ones you don't have in common.
Yeah, I want this profile. If this person decides that's the profile I'm putting at risk, I want that profile at risk, right? Because that's what makes this person willing to interact. Because there's a vulnerability on this side, the loss of the reputation that has been accrued up until that point. Terry, do you want to dive in a little bit? No?
Let's talk about that. Let's talk about that offline because I have an idea for a deeply technical protocol. We don't want to do it in this project.
Well, we started to get there. Yeah.
Your cards fall.
Cards fall. Okay. Well, we got audio going.
He's a belt and suspenders kind of guy. Video, audio. We got a note taker, right?
That's right. Do we have a note taker?
No.
Probably not.
The audio.
In the audio, yeah, that'll be good enough. So, there's a couple of things here. One, we're wanting each of these to be able to stay distinct. And you touched on the DNS stuff, which sort of has to do with this person seeing where that request is coming from. And that may be something, I don't know if blockchain, but distributed hash tables, that may be something where these interactions are happening in a neutral territory.
Yeah, that's what I was talking. We're both using the same server, but the server has no incentive to reveal that information to each other.
Was that where you were going to go?
Yeah, that was how I broke that analysis problem. The side channel analysis.
Got it.
Terry, our conversation a minute ago, we dove into wanting this to be, narrow, and this was kind of the Henrik 21 years old versus 36-year-old thing. But we worked back from there, going, no, that. If you put that skin in the game, that skin in the game needs to be not just for this, but once they send this, I now have, this has been me, now I believe that this person does control access to that account.
No, in fact, we had a way of doing it without Matt knowing that it was Alan, just that whoever comes in can use it.
Right.
Has the reputation sufficient to use it. Whoever it may be.
That's right, but that's
Without
telling it's
revealing
me.
it, without
Doesn't tell
revealing
me
it.
it's me, but it tells me it's somebody who has control of this profile.
No, not even that.
No.
No, he's just the guy has something that proves he has the reputation to access it, and it's certified by somebody you trust.
But that kind of moves.
Now you want to go back to report, but the guy up
That's right.
there
Yeah.
knows who it is, and so you can report the privacy violation.
Yeah.
But never know that it was Alan. Only the reputation center knows it was Alan.
And this kind of got into where we dove as well, which is when I received that initial thing. Let's say I do take this as, okay, you have control of that account. Like the person who's requesting this has at least control of that account. I am able then to take that profile, it's now been vetted in a way that allows me to trust it, and check other areas for me. So I'm not only checking the places that he was directing me to, I can check any other
That's a much
location
harder
with that
problem.
profile.
That's a much harder problem. Because now you can do it if the reputation services trust each other. But that's hard to guarantee.
But I don't have to let them trust each other. I can decide which reputation
No,
services
but now
I
you
trust.
need some identifier to say it's the same guy, and now you've broken part of your privacy.
But that identifier is the one that he's presenting to
No.
me and
See-
to each of those.
See, here's how it works. I go up to him to prove my reputation. He's
sure.
proven. I say,
Yeah.
tell Matt that I'm okay. I'm a okay guy.
Yeah.
And he gives me some secret. Let's say it's the number 17.
Yeah.
And this reputation service says to Matt, whoever comes in with number 17 is the guy I said is okay to use your service. That's it. I make a request to you and I say, oh, my secret is 17. You say, oh, it's approved. I can do it. Now, that'll work, right? Now, if I violate the rules, you say, hey, the guy who you told me was number 17, ding his reputation. This guy can do that.
Sure.
Right? But there's no way to connect that to some other reputation. So you've made the problem a third.
Terry.
I'm not sure what we remember exactly what we talked about. Whatever's delivered from a reputation service to this resource, use that information to check other places, but there may not be much there on the person.
Yeah, I mean, well, the him saying this 17.
That's just a nonce. It's
That-
changed that. Yeah.
Sure. Is hey, this is I know that you
This
are
is how we
this
join.
thing.
Yeah, that's how we join.
That's right. So that gives me a connection between here. But my whole point for using this profile was to have more than a connection to one. I want a connection to a bunch of them, to his history with that pseudonym
Yeah,
across
you
multiple domains.
Then you would use the nonce would be the pseudonym.
That's right.
Right.
And the reason
In
I want that is
addition.
because I don't want him to be able to shop and say, well, I burned my bridge with this reputation broker, so I'm not going to present that one anymore. I'm only going to present this one. And he can do that with profiles already, right? But that becomes a much less costly thing if he can just burn silos.
So this is what I'm talking about, the initial negotiation as to which reputation service will be used. And there's no reason why Matt has to say, I'll only take one. He'll say, here's, I need
That's right.
3. And if we agree on 3 of them, let's check all 3 and then this protocol will work just fine.
And my assumption is going to be 3 from this 70 or
Right.
something
Yeah,
like
yeah,
that. And that when there's enough fraud, when the fraud rate gets high enough that I'm experiencing pain because people are able to submit those 3, and, well, I'm going to demand 5,
Yeah.
or I'm going to demand a
But
different
then this
layer.
will work just fine. But you have to have that initial negotiation to agree on the reputation broker.
So I wanted to just throw a social aspect to this, and then we can go back to it, because I think it probably ties together. I don't know what your computers are that you first use, but think of a fax machine, with tape or whatever, right?
1620 in my case.
And then
1401.
maybe, I guess my first computer was a TRS-80, maybe.
And
Or
we,
like
must,
an
we have a
Atari.
moment of silence for Radio Shack.
Right, Atari. And then there's I guess the Mac or whatever, PC, IBM. And then now we have really small computers, and now we have headphones and but if you think about that, like from like a evolution standpoint, different discrete points in time, and you have like, let's say a baby, it's crawling, and then it's a toddler, and then it's in like high school, let's say, college, and then first job, marriage, senior center, and then like death, right? But in general, you don't actually talk to the people that were your friends from, let's say, high school, right? So this reputation piece is interesting because how do I know? You guys don't have an understanding of me as a person except for the last day 1, to day 3, right? So reputation grows the more contact you have, right? So if we imagine like this circle of influence, that this is me. My circle of influence is pretty small because I'm an infant. I don't really reach that many people. But the circle of influence here, they don't really overlap, right? So if you, let's say, when you get married, you invite your high school friend, it's not really a reputational grounding. It doesn't matter, right? So could you imagine this for your online identity and just kind of truncate it to say, people should not have access to my fax machine because you can't plug it in anymore. Like there's no ecosystem that supports it. It's
So
like
part
fax machine.
let me understand what
Yeah.
you're saying here. So, in high school I did some pretty dumb stuff, and I really don't want to be dinged for that now.
Yeah.
Right? I've learned my lesson. Right? And so I would like somehow to degrade that, have that reputation. The effect of that on my reputation decrease with age over time.
Now, if you're working within a specific community that has living within a specific community that has a social norm around the rate of degradation, and somebody held on to that and kept presenting that later on, you could have other community members going, "Hey,
That's
jerk,"
right. That's right.
you know.
That's right. But I think what you're saying is
Stop bringing
these
up old
things,
history.
what I did a long time ago should count less than what I did more recently.
Well, what you did a long time ago, it's not even accessible anymore.
Oh,
like
okay.
so like 5 1/4 just no one. You can go to an archive place to get
downstairs?
info. At about 3.5, right? No
I got
one
punch
uses
cards.
that format anymore, and so it becomes dead language, right? So like your identity should also become dead by that very token.
So are you
of-
saying that's a good thing or a bad thing or just an unavoidable consequence?
it should happen in a more systematic way than it does now.
Don't you think that it happens increasingly less because of the way we archive and have the cloud?
So it happens because it gets buried underneath a whole mountain. More so that like you'd have to data mine it and have like searchable like haystack in the needle, like
As,
needle in the haystack.
as those technologies get more affordable, that becomes
And discreet. You
But-
know, what would have been a needle in a haystack is now a very acute and precision search.
Then the question is, would people want to have access to the vaccination info?
Well,
Like, is it valuable
let
to
me
you?
go
Would
on
you
what
rather?
Alan said. Alan, among others, did some things in their high school years that they might not be proud of. And I'll give you a real world example. I'll name the guy and everything. Some of you may have heard of a fellow named when Bob was the program director in his early 20s of a Pittsburgh radio station, Bob got drunk, chased girls, he was just a critter. My good buddy, who I went to college with, was the news director of the radio station. They all lived in a house together. And there's a picture of Bob naked on the floor with his vomit next to him. And my friend Steve has never offered that up for blackmail. But that picture makes the rounds every few years. Remember when Bob was young?
Only because someone scanned it, right? There used to be one
Steve-
physical
Well, yes,
object.
But from now on, we'll never lose digital.
Yeah.
But it only matters to the people that know him.
No, anybody can
No.
search it. It's all searchable.
Yeah.
That's the point.
And
What if you're proud of the things you did in high school and college? Why would
So-
you
Well, then
want
no-
those
I guess
to degrade?
from my perspective, it's not a technical issue, right? It's a social
Social
issue.
issue.
And the social issue is, do we want those kinds of things to be remembered?
Yeah.
Do we
You
not
should be
want
able
them to be
choose.
remembered? Do we want the individual to exercise control over that, or do we want a group, a norm established by the group?
Look
to
at
not?
Jean Valjean, right? He was arrested, escaped from prison, right? This is a guy we should hate forever. And yet he did good things throughout his life. This is what I mean about ancient history not having zero effect on reputation, but perhaps counting less than more recent history.
Well, I guess it sounds like the group wants to keep that history alive.
We have no choice.
It's not that. I mean, the right to be forgotten comes in here, but the information probably can't be deleted anymore. Anything that happened since 1993 can't be deleted anymore. But
to make it less
but-
easy to find.
no, it's not a question of how easy it is to find. It's a question of whether the social system, the question is whether the technical system that we build that models the social system that we want it to model correctly puts it in perspective in terms of your reputation. So it's not a question of forgetting it. It's a question of constructing or modeling in a technological system a reputation that we would recognize in a social context, and that's a very hard problem. But forgetting it is the wrong answer. I don't know how. Like
But
I
I
think
think
the
what
right to
she's
be
saying is that
forgotten.
you can make it hard to find. Like for instance, it's
making it
easy
hard
to
to
find
find.
an old tweet.
That's-
It's very hard to find an old Facebook post.
That's
If
security
we
through
architect the
obscurity.
internet to be more like Facebook than like Twitter, we make it easier to recycle old, or not recycle, to trash old identities.
But if you count on something being hard to find, it's not a deterministic system, right? Because somebody will find it and somebody else won't.
Look, I know nobody will be laughing at my Fortran code because it's on punch cards under my bed in my bedroom. Okay? But I know, but I know that people will be able always, forever into the future, be able to laugh at my JavaScript code because it's on the web, and once it's on the web, it's there forever. Now, will somebody bother to read it? That's a different question.
Or will somebody hold it against you when you've done
That's
all these
right.
good
But
works later
So
in your life?
the point is, it will be there. Is anybody going to be interested in looking for it? Probably not. But if somebody wants to deny me my Nobel Prize, they will point to the stupid Java code I wrote to convince the committee not to award it to me.
Well, I feel like it speaks more to the addition of context as opposed to the subtraction of data,
Right.
right? Because you look at a Yelp review for Joe's Diner, and over the course of the last 10 years, Joe's Diner has gotten 1-star reviews, everyone's gotten food poisoning, but now Joe's Diner is under new ownership. So what we're really saying is Joe's Diner.
Or an ad with Yelp.
Yeah. So what we're really saying is that Joe's Diner, in the context of being run by Joe, is a really terrible restaurant. But now, as it's being run by Bob, we have no data yet.
This just happened in Menlo Park. A dry cleaner went out of business because he cheated his customers out of $300,000 by charging to their credit card illegally. And another guy took over that shop, and people don't want to go into the shop.
Right.
So this just happened.
I'd like to ask a question. When you first talked about pen names,
Yeah.
I think there's a difference. This is not pen names.
It's different identities through time. And I was trying to do like a more concrete example, but pen names, it's different, right? It could be simultaneously
Right.
now.
Yeah.
Existing.
I could be known as something else, which I am personally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they can also be digital artifacts. Because an artifact is technically something from one time that stays in that time.
Yeah.
So maybe that's a clearer way to say it. I know it from the
Yeah, so digital artifact not for the sake of reputation. It's really for like if I'm really into poker or like pool tables or something, and I have a whole collection of pool tables or like Hello Kitty paraphernalia, then people know me online for Hello Kitty stuff, and they'll go to me as the expert, right? But it's reputation only useful for the people that love Hello Kitty, right? So that kind of thing where you have a different persona, and it shouldn't matter where that person lives physically unless they have a museum or something, right? Like.
But I
Yeah.
thought your question was interesting in that a pen name is something that I can choose to abandon.
Yes.
That was an interesting question.
So like, I can sell my Hello Kitty stuff on eBay and it gets distributed. But if let's say you're, I don't know, I'm a big fan of Murder She Wrote, Jamie Fletcher, right? So when people know she's Jessica B. Fletcher, it changes personality, right?
Most dangerous city in America.
Yeah.
Murder capital of America.
Yeah. But like, do people have a desire for pseudonyms now, or like,
Yeah,
does
sure.
that
yeah.
not?
Oh, absolutely.
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 They're
So
for
how
a
do you-
variety of reasons.
How do you keep that separate from your actual like?
Haven't you ever made up a one-off email address just so you could sign up for an account?
Yeah, but now we have, in order to create an email, you have to have a referential email address, right?
There's plenty of Hotmail. You just
Hotmail,
Gmail.
Yahoo.
Just create an email address
Yeah,
on the
sure.
fly.
So
So that's a pseudonym.
yeah. I mean, is it desired, and what are the mechanisms behind it that's
My
asserted?
mechanism is I don't want to get more spam from people, and I just want to create an account and see if I want to be there.
And
Twitter's full of pseudonymity. People have an account that they run. It's one of my favorites is Swift on security. You don't know who runs it, but it's just a lot of cool stuff about security, right? So
There's also
pseudonymity.
there's a bit of investigative spam analysis where I've joined things with a pseudonym and watched with that pseudonym and its emails. And I've had pseudonyms, where I've done this for forensic purposes. Pseudonym. I have one pseudonym that I accidentally used twice. Same name, but one was my age and one was 30. Same name. So it says actually a junior. And I didn't realize I'd done that until I went to Facebook to check it out. And I thought, geez, which one was this? I had to figure it out. I had to do my own things. But my point is, I've done this to watch the path and the trail to see what's what. and to see what kind of advertising comes, what kind of spam comes, and to determine also, not out of Facebook, but just out of mail, who's selling what. Because there are those who claim they don't sell your information, and then suddenly after you signed up for them, boom, 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 boom. So it is, they are selling your
When I was an undergrad, we take those flyers in the back for the He-Man stuff,
Yeah.
and we'd fill them out, but I'd use my real name, but I use a different middle initial for
Yeah.
each one. And then we could track who was selling what mailing list. So these are reasons for pseudonyms.
So in the context of pseudonyms, and how does that relate to like the trust model that was talked about
Because
here?
every one of these things is a pseudonym,
Oh, okay.
right?
And
So
my-
every one of these, and
But you don't have to be the 17. Like you
No,
have
no,
to
no.
that's
disclose
a
that-
specific pseudonym.
Okay.
That's you trying to make
But-
use
but-
of one pseudonym
That's a
without having
one-time
to touch any of the
pseudonym.
others.
But
a one-time
pseudonyms can
pseudonym.
earn trust.
Not
The
necessarily.
way the pseudonym acts online, because we're talking about an online world here, the pseudonym can derive trust based on how it acts. Because the machine doesn't know that it's posing as any number of different nyms that I have. The machine says, this nym acts well, doesn't curse, doesn't accuse people, doesn't throw stones. This nym's a good person. This nym has done no wrong, so they vouch for the to-date goodness of the nym.
And basically for me, I got pushed to pseudonyms. Like that wasn't something I was interested in initially. I got pushed there by the realization that in the real world, I have my life that I live at home, and then I have my life that I live in the bathroom. And those are different. There are things that happen in one place that are not always seen in that other place. And same at work, and same when I go to the town next door, and same for the guy or woman who has an affair, right? There is a disconnect between the information about the knowledge of what has happened here and what happened, and that's basically in the real world. It's not pseudonyms. We're not using different names, but in terms of what other people have access to information-wise, it's different. And in a digitally connected world, where all this stuff does end up being recorded forever, searchable, indexable, linkable, etc., you start some of the privacy things that you might want, some of the control over your own life for being able to behave in one way in one context, and a different way in another. My belief is you end up having to have pseudonyms, and pseudonyms that work in
Right, but you should be able to like get rid of it at some point.
That's
There has to
right.
be a
Well, so if I didn't want to, if I didn't want to use this one anymore, it's not tied to my real name.
Yeah, but there's history.
Let me make a couple
behind
points.
that, right?
You asked, do people still want to have pseudonyms? So
Yeah.
one thing that you didn't say when you referred to this diagram
Yes.
is that the reputation that's most important here for most people is not this reputation. The reputation that's most important is this unknown reputation of this guy. And so one of the reasons you choose a pseudonym to disclose to this guy is because you don't yet know if he's going to sell your name to a spammer. So you use this is why I said you need to be able to create one. It needs to be a disposable pseudonym that you create here. And that's fine. If it has zero reputation at that point, that's entirely appropriate because you haven't disclosed anything. Disclosing your reputation is disclosing something. You don't want to do that. You don't want to give this opportunity to this scammer the opportunity to go up here and say this is a bad actor. So you don't want to disclose that. You need a disposable identity every single time you start using a new service provider because you don't know his reputation.
Yeah, but if the service provider is Matt's phone number, he may not want to reveal it to you unless you're a good
that's
guy.
a special case, but in the
Well,
case
No,
of
that's not a special case. That's the case
bear
I'm
with me.
interested in.
Well, I didn't.
Matt's
I
sitting in
didn't-
a
okay,
bar,
In that case,
and a
Yeah.
girl wants
In
to
that
give him a revocable phone number.
in that case,
So she
I
can check his reputation.
if that's what you're mostly interested in, then I don't understand what you're interested in. But let me just finish up what I was saying about this. If this is a service provider, by which I mean a store, a Facebook, or whatever, we don't know the reputation, so we want to give them a disposable idea at first. Now, the next thing that we want to do, as we begin to trust this person and trust his reputation, is we want to start to do progressive disclosure with him. And one of the ways that we would do that would be by correlating one or more of the pseudonyms that we're using on other sites. So you sign up with this social network that you haven't got any experience with, and once you've got some experience with them, you say, oh, by the way, this is my Twitter pseudonym, because I'm willing to tie those together because I have a friend in common or something like that. That progressive progressive disclosure is not something we have any mechanism for today. So at this site, I haven't done any of the work. I just posted a comment that the default behavior of any service provider should be pseudonymous from the beginning with progressive disclosure. And that's hard, and that's why nobody does it, but it ought to be the default behavior that we use. And if that were the default behavior, a lot of unsophisticated users like my mom wouldn't be victimized by
But
these
if a service provider is, say, a mailing list, it may not want to let somebody with zero reputation in.
That's too bad. That
But if
needs
it's
to be the
Craigslist,
default.
it is a one-time transaction, so it's not.
Right, but if it's something like a mailing list, you don't want to let a random person.
So now, but please do try to explain what you mean when you say that the service provider is your phone number. I didn't understand that.
That's kind of a separate thing, but
At IIW 3 years ago,
protected resources.
some of you may have been in the room when I blew up at the Verizon guy, who said, well, Verizon should just be
the identity provider.
IDP of the entire country. They're trusted. They have your number. You've done business with them, and that was one of those times. Doesn't happen to me often, but mouth beat brain to the punch, and I used much foul language and assailed that guy with a lot of rah-rahs from the room.
Of course.
And then he said,
Rightfully
"Well,
so.
we will agree to disagree." I said, "No, we will just disagree. Because we agree on nothing."
So what did you mean by the phone number is
well,
the use case?
so
that
I'm
you're
interested in the progressive.
Disclosure.
I do agree that that you do want to be able to make yourself not vulnerable at all at first, and then maybe vulnerable a little bit. But if you're making yourself vulnerable a little bit in ways that start to tie the various pseudonyms in your life together, that is making you become much more vulnerable than
Once
you
they're
were
tied
intending.
together,
Yeah,
they're always
no, understand me. That's one of the ways that you may want to exercise progressive disclosure is by correlating various pseudonyms together.
Yeah.
But there are many other ways that you might want to.
And I like that. I agree with that. But
So-
there is one thing here that I'm not putting emphasis. I probably haven't put sufficient emphasis on that sort of undergirds my logic for all of this, and that is that this transaction isn't even the whole point. Like, this isn't really what the focus is. The focus is on, if you screwed me over, you violated my terms of service, you pirated the stuff, you sold it elsewhere, whatever, but you violated the agreement that we had struck here. And I do leave feedback for you later. The next guy that you try to use that profile with can look, and if he cared about any of the places, now I'm not just going to leave
How
reputation
can
here,
you
I'm
look
going to
at
leave
the
it in
pseudonymous?
a whole bunch of places. What's that?
How can he look at pseudonymous?
I can leave it on that pseudonym, right? So this is why the one-time thing doesn't work in a context where the whole point of this interaction is so that if you screw me over, I have some recourse. And the point there is not for me to have the recourse. The point is so that there is a disincentive to screw me in the first place. And the later party, there's one last part. The later party who you next submit this pseudonym to, because they've demanded a certain amount of reputation, and that has enough reputation to get there, and they see that little thing there, they get to decide what it means.
You're assuming a power imbalance that should not exist, in my opinion.
Okay.
You're assuming that the service provider gets to stipulate that I only allow good people in. And that's just unfair because people are the ones who are going to suffer if these big
I
finish.
think you're totally right.
Let me
and
finish.
And it's okay.
The people are the ones that are going to suffer if the commercial operations that run these services misbehave. And so what the need to create
This is our
a
disagreement.
pseudonymous ID with no reputation attached to it means that neither party has
No,
any
okay.
reputation at the start.
So-
which
But
is
this
how
whole thing is
it's
flawed
a
for another
sa-
reason,
it's
okay?
a fair
Both of these people
exchange.
have an incentive to keep their privacy. This person has no incentive to keep anyone's privacy. So this whole thing doesn't work. So my mother takes reviews on TripAdvisor for hotels that she stays at, right? That's her, and she has an anonymous thing. She goes back to those hotels, so she doesn't want the waiter going, hey, you screwed me over, you left me a bad review. So she's got this identity over here that's separate from her real identity, and she goes to TripAdvisor and she leaves this review. And then one of her friends says, hey, I'm on TripAdvisor.
we have to give those reputation services a bad reputation when we do that.
Well,
But he's
Facebook already
absolutely
has a bad
accurate.
Well,
I mean,
reputation.
more to the point,
Right?
we need to
Facebook
get
is constantly
more to the
sharing
point. We
information
need
that you
to
don't want shared because it's in their interest to share.
we need to give the reputation provider an incentive to treat us fairly, and the way
Yeah, but you're the only one who wants that to happen.
fair-
We all want your secret information. And
but
we will
no,
all
but
pay for it or look at ads to see
this
what you
is
do in the
why
background.
this is why when individuals go to choose a reputation provider, they need to choose some. And this is a trust issue, right? We don't trust anybody we do business with on the internet today. They're all crooks. But when we go to choose a reputation provider, which is very similar to choosing an identity provider, we're going to need to be able to vet that provider as accepting money for the service that they provide and not accepting money from the other side of that transaction.
Well, that's part of the reputation.
Wouldn't that be a nice world to live
So-
in?
No,
Yeah,
I'm
but
saying
I
this
mean,
is-
that's what I told them. If
that's
you
the
don't
only-
want
you're
it to
exactly
link to your name,
right.
don't put it online.
That's
Because
exactly
that's not
right.
the world we live in.
You are exactly right,
creating
that that's
the
the
Facebook
only way that this would work.
Yes.
So
That's not the world we live in.
I have one other point to resolve with
Get off my
this, and
soapbox.
we're just to speak to you. In any communication, there is, even though the communication is symmetric, there is an initiator and a listener. And that basic asymmetry of the bootstrap is what handles your dispute. Because when Alan goes to talk to Matt, he has already made a judgment of Matt's reputation as to how much he's going to trust Matt
And
on
he-
that initial communication.
An initial,
That's right.
very limited.
Very limited.
Yeah.
And now Matt is asking how much he can trust Alan on his first communication with Alan.
This becomes a
And
negotiation.
it becomes a negotiation. But it's that it's asymmetry that lets us break the conundrum.
It's not a symmetry though, Alan, because generally this is a very powerful
It's something,
commercial operation, and I'm an
It
individual.
doesn't have to be though. It could just be the digital
So my point
resource
is
that's trying to be
the point
accessed.
is-
It could just be a phone
The
number.
point is, it doesn't matter. If this is a company, and I've checked its reputation
Okay.
before I initiated the connection.
You guys are right, and I'm wrong, and so I'm going to modify what I just said.
Okay?
In order to establish that balance, we need to understand what kind of entity each side is.
That's right.
To begin with.
But I'm still making a judgment on when I initiate the connection. Do I want to talk to this guy or company or whatever it is? That's clear, and I must have a way of reaching it. That makes me the initiator.
And we think the answer is yes, because you're
Because I'm-
interested in something.
And there's
something.
some level.
I'm going to get some benefit from my vulnerability.
There's some extent to which he's already made himself, this individual, he or she,
Made
has
himself
already
vulnerable.
made himself vulnerable. But
Because he
putting
has
this
an
stuff out
endpoint.
there, and there's
Okay,
something out
so
there.
now,
in the
so
first
now
place.
let me state the conclusion of my
Yeah.
my most recent, hopefully corrected idea, and that is that my purpose here, and the reason that I got it wrong in the first place, is that I'm trying to reestablish that balance between individuals and powerful corporations, so that we can have a more trustworthy interaction.
And that's a fine thing to do, but I think it's orthogonal to the issue that Matt's worried about.
It is.
And
But-
part of
but
the reason- I mean-
hopefully his solution will also
serve you.
And I'm trying to solve that same problem, and the place that I get to really at the end of the day, I got driven to this because in trying to solve that, it's the transaction cost imbalances that really are problematic there. I'm trying to make it so that this person can make use of insights gathered by loose aggregations of other people, maybe chained together in certain ways. But I want to limit how far that can spread by, hey, if you said you were going to only use this yourself and you weren't going to build derivative works on it, and you do build derivative works on it, you screwed me over. And I want that person to be able to restrain it. So this is sort of, how do I give the initial creator enough control so that they're willing to interact in the first place, and have later people be able to maybe violate that and pay the cost.
So
That's the thing.
here's another way of saying the same thing. Whenever I collaborate with you, I make myself vulnerable to you in some way.
Yeah.
Maybe very minimal, maybe a lot, but I make myself vulnerable. And so the benefit I expect to get from that should outweigh the cost of that vulnerability, right? And that's the judgment that we're making here when we do these
interactions.
And it
He's-
won't
but he's
always
also
work.
He's also going to then onto the feedback stage.
Well,
That's
he wants,
right.
he wants to make my
I-
cost of a violation higher.
That's
Can
right.
Can I
Yeah.
ask you to do one more thing next
Yeah.
time you draw this diagram?
Yeah.
This diagram should not be an unbalanced diagram. It should be symmetrical.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's all.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
in fact,
that's
when
right, because
when
this ends up being a two-way negotiation.
Right. When I connect to that guy and give him a pseudonym, I'm vulnerable to him in the sense that he can give me a bad reputation even though I did nothing.
That's a really good point because he has to have some pseudonym as well.
Well, I don't know about
There's
that.
something- there's something that's showing up.
In many cases, that person is holding out a correlated ID and not a pseudonym, and the initiator chooses to use
That's
that
right.
correlated ID.
Or it's an entity, not a person.
But my point is that we need to be able to ding his reputation the same.
That's right. That's why I meant there needs to be something there. And one of the
Drawing
examples that I've
symmetrical is a good idea.
one of the examples that I've gone to in the past has been, if this person had set a trap, essentially in terms, and said, oh, if these 7 different things line up, then you owe me $1 million, right? And you would never have guessed that from looking at them individually unless you were a lawyer. And so this guy had not seen it, so he basically commits fraud. Those 7 things line up, bing, springs the chap, he says, you owe me $1 million. The guy says, I'm not paying you $1 million. This guy dings his reputation. And the next party that uses that reputation in an interaction looks at that and goes, well, hold on a second. And there's other signals. This guy said, hey, let me contest that. Point to some other people who are saying this is bunk. And I'm the one who's trying to decide whether or not I'm going to make myself vulnerable to him now. I'm the one in a position to make a judgment about whether the feedback that was given here was valid, unjustifiable, this was Snowden, or this was a horrible violation of, there's a judgment that gets made by that end user who's making a decision.
Reputation services in the position to record some of that.
They're in the position to
Receiving
record
claims.
maybe the raw claim, and then you can have them or others interpreting, submitting
So
metadata.
if the guy's
But
reporting a gazillion people for not paying $1 million, you might think he's pulling a scam.
Yeah, and you go, I can disregard that. I think it's safe to play with this. Or I think it's safe to let him look at my Yelp reviews at least, though maybe not my bank account, whatever that is. But the goal for me there was how do you enable pretty decent coordination amidst disagreement? And the point that you made earlier was totally spot on. These reputation providers are terrible right now because there is no feedback loop. There's no, hey, that broke for me. Let me not interact with them ever again.
Oh, they know. They know they're broken. They're intentionally broken.
They don't, but there are no alternatives today, right? Like
There's
they are.
hello.
Sure.
This is my whole point,
Yeah.
right?
Well, where are you imagining are the reputation people today? There really aren't. Oh, Facebook's not a reputation.
Yelp's a reputation provider. Facebook is at
Yeah,
some
Yelp is
level.
not an advertising provider. Yelp is an advertising agent.
That's right.
It's true. It's true.
Don't give a
And an unethical advertising.
Yeah,
I mean, I guess the reputation providers that we have at present are all within mostly peer-to-peer marketplaces, right? Like you got eBay, Uber, that kind of stuff.
Craigslist.
Yeah, and does Craigslist have reputation?
Yeah, they do.
They do.
I don't know.
I don't think they do.
I don't think
They
I've ever
don't.
seen any kind of reputation thing on
No.
And
They
that's-
do
You know,
have.
you know what I'm thinking of? They have a crowdsourced, like, this is objection.
Yeah, you can sort of
Yeah,
try to get people
because most of
to
their
push back.
transactions are done in the physical world,
Yeah.
so they wouldn't know,
Yeah.
Some of the
Think
things
that
that
person
I know
in
you
open
talked
place where
about
police
is reputation
forces are.
providers tied into the kind of violations that there's a certain interaction with that community. Say, I think we talked about this one's hard, image sharing, right? Where you can watermark the image in some obscure way, right? Without getting into that.
So there was a separate question that we dove into, which was basically, so if I give this guy something that I say, hey, don't share this, and let's say it's an image, he could share it anonymously, and if he shares it anonymously, and it looks identical to all the other times that I've shared that, then there's a 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000 or whatever the number of times I've given that out, that was the guy responsible. And so the question became, do you try to do watermarking in some way?
I think the answer to that question is there's no such thing as anonymous. why we carefully use the term pseudonymous, because in a practical sense, there's no way that anybody can actually do anything anonymous.
But
no,
if
no,
he,
but the point is,
but if
he
he,
gives us the two of us the same picture, and then he finds it exposed on the web. He doesn't know which two of us to blame.
There's always not a trail. It may not be accessible.
That's right. It's not a
sure. But my point is, how do you make it accessible? And the thing that we kind of mapped out was.
For example, let's say that somebody violates your Creative Commons license and you're not sure who
In fact,
it was.
I think Creative Commons is a good
Right. So
Yeah.
let's say somebody violates your Creative Commons license. You don't necessarily know who it is. You go get a lawyer. They do discovery and they find out who it is. There's legal stuff that backs that up.
That's
and we're not
true,
going to solve
but
that with a technological system.
well, that's true, but those tend to be really that legal system
I
is very
understand
costly,
that,
and as a result, we don't use
But
it.
that's part of the vulnerability that you're submitting to when you do that.
I understand, but I've kind of framed this in the context of how much can we solve without having to resort
I
to
don't
that
think you can
$1 million
solve it.
case system. And the thing that we were talking about is, if I watermark it, he could give out a degraded version of that image, right? But if I watermark it in ways that he's not aware of, and I make it unique to him and different from all the other versions of that thing that I have given out, when that shows up on the web, we have Terry mapped out 3 pieces. I've got the original, the original agreement.
I think you're doing great stuff here.
Have the agreement.
And I would prefer that you don't go down the road of digital rights management as well.
We're not trying to do that. We're trying to do.
This is just for the audit trail.
That's exactly what you're going to do.
It's audit
You're talking
trail.
about
It's audit
watermark.
trail.
Audit trail.
So here's what it is. Here's the agreement, right? I made these unique changes. Now you're not telling anybody about that. This is only when there's a violation. And I found it on the online at this URL, right? So the agreement said it wouldn't show up anywhere else. It did show up somewhere else. And the unique changes that I made were these. See them at the URL here. So I submit those here. And use that to basically say, hey, this guy screwed me over. I could also take that to a court of law, sure. But more importantly for me, the court of law stuff is just too costly to be useful at scale, right?
So if you have a community that's about sharing photos like this or some limited use of photos, that reputation service they have some verification processes that take those 3 bits of evidence and just dock your. Well, the other thing you get is the original number 17. Who you gave it to.
Yeah, that's right. I gave it to that guy.
You gave it to the guy who presented number
Well, so this was we were talking about this in the context of like something like a consent
Right,
receipt. This
that's
is a receipt.
That's got number 17.
Yeah. It says 17.
That's a big random number.
And,
Sure.
and
Larger than 17.
And when I
Well,
discovered
there are
this,
28 digits missing.
Yeah, so
when you discover it out there where it's not supposed to be, the reputation service just takes that back down a notch.
Yeah.
On pretty good evidence.
Yeah.
And admittedly, that's very specific to whatever environment you're in.
That's right, and it's not that it's not that I'm able to remove that from that URL. I'm not crippling his use of it.
Right.
It's just a way for me to say credibly, that guy screwed me
and
over.
it might not be worth going to court. I tell Matt, don't share the Vegas pictures with my mother, and I find out he does, so I won't share the Vegas pictures with him anymore.
That's right, and maybe other people won't either. There's two points here. One, Christopher Allen has talked a number of times about future forward secrecy, which I think something like this may be useful for. So it's that you send that stuff, you maybe hash that at some point in time, and
Not so sure.
in logging, but that makes it so that it's not later on that you fabricate this. Or I guess all you really need is the consent receipt and this
Future
piece.
forward secrecy solves a different problem.
Okay. I was saying that you need to have these showing being logged at the time of transaction and not after the violation is found, because otherwise you're
You have to commit
fabricating.
first and then
Yeah.
process.
The other thing is Chris Allen had written a blog post outlining altruistic punishment, which was you guys all familiar with that? Altruistic punishment is basically I'm willing to take a hit to hurt you for violating a social norm, for having hurt someone else. And groups that, in game theory, groups that don't have the ability to punish a bad actor, they devolve to like no cooperation almost immediately. Groups that have the ability to punish a bad actor, but it stops there, they'll be good up until about like 16 people or something like that, and then they or maybe it's 80. and then they fall off. But groups that can punish the person who did not punish the bad actor, they sustain cooperation at up to whatever size scale they've got.
So is this the Nazis telling you you have to turn in your parents?
Yep.
No, this is if in the community that I am
I must have missed something.
in the community that I am in, if I thought it was a bad thing to share secrets that you said you didn't share, and you
Didn't report him
didn't
to
ding
the
that
Stasi.
guy?
Didn't report him to the Stasi.
You didn't report to the Stasi, sure.
Yeah, that's what he said.
But it amounts to, but within whatever community you are interested in participating in. It sort of becomes, are you willing to stand up to the social norms?
I'm sitting here trying to figure out what the difference is between the Stasi and this, and the
Yeah, there
difference.
isn't.
No, there is. The difference is that the only things that are going to be reported here are things that we can prove. Everybody can agree there was a violation, as opposed to turn your parent, or as opposed to the McCarthy hearing.
Yeah, no, but the Stasi would punish you very much if you when somebody turned out you lied about it. So you carried a very high risk if you made a false accusation.
And the Stasi would also punish you for having conversations about things.
Yeah, I think
whether
the
or not that
Stasi
would
didn't
lead
have
to
as high a
activity.
bar as we're
No, that's right. Yeah, no, but
I think the McCarthy
qualitatively-
hearings might be better.
And to be honest, there's all these other agreements that you might have here that have nothing to do with copying, right? And have to do with how you behave and these other things.
Don't send me spam. Don't ring my phone at 3 a.m.
That's right. So there's all these other things that you might care about in terms of behavior. And I think those you can use some mechanisms to deal with those, but it's not this. This was specific to.
And by the way, this is transitive. So if Matt gives Alan his phone number, and Alan passes it on to Terry, and Terry starts calling Matt at 3 a.m, Matt's going to cut off Alan.
Alan, you dick.
That's right. and that's important because of a lot of our audit trail systems would show that Terry made the call, and Matt never heard of Terry, and it's useless.
That's right. That's right.
And so something like this, the transitive property of reputation is very important.
Because you are actually, when I come back to hit you, you are in a position to hit Terry.
And I should.
And that could be because Terry had brought up this point earlier when we were talking separately, and he said, oh, so if I've taken the file, and you had said don't share it publicly, but I had sent it to a website to do some photo processing or something, right? They were processing, and their stuff was lax. And due to their screw up, Matt gets hurt. I'm going to hold Terry responsible.
So I call this the chain
but Terry's
collision.
gonna hold them
This is
responsible.
the chain collision car accident, right? I get hit. I sue the guy behind me. He sues the guy behind him. Now, maybe the guy behind him doesn't sue the guy behind him because it's his teenage son. Whoever the last guy is that doesn't blame the guy behind him is the one who pays. And this is exactly what this is. But my reputation gets dinged rightfully because I use bad judgment in giving to a schlub like Terry.
That's right. That's right. Terry's like, thanks, Alan. But what that does, system-wise, it makes it so that when somebody's not doing a good job, there's real incentives to up their game. Because otherwise you don't have a feedback loop that makes them bear the cost of having screwed up in a way that hurt me.
And by the way, capability systems
Obviously.
do this very well.
Yeah.
Very well.
But so where this came in was where capability don't get
And
used
identity
to.
systems don't.
This was basically how do you do capabilities type stuff. Like if it's call my phone, I can give out a different phone number every time. But if it's here's an image, how do I? That was sort of a hack to try to get similar outcomes.
So data once revealed is a very different property than something that is an active entity and you do it per invocation. So you gotta do it.
So that's where we're trying to
down a
come up
rabbit
with
hole.
something
You went down a rabbit hole.
that smells DRM-y.
You went down a rabbit hole.
Yeah.
Smells of DRM.
Anybody else?
In
got
HP, we built a DRM system, and our claim to fame was it was no worse than anybody else's.
Alan, your name came up in the discussion I had 2 weeks ago. I was talking to Jay Unger about something kind of sort of similar to this.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, all right. Yeah. Yeah, no,
It has to be because
because we worry
it's
about
the
these things when
only
we
way
build
that
our
you can
Mark Stigler and
present yourself in one way and have it be
This all
discreet.
comes out. But Mark and I are very good on mechanism and lousy
You're
on
no
policy.
longer officially Space E. You're just your own.
We're now
thing
our own independent
You're
entity.
your own entity now. You're no longer responsible for what happens in this.
Well, and I should probably give you a little more background on this. The goal with all of this ridiculous architecture is so that I can, as an individual, I can rely on somebody else to steer me fluidly through transactions that I don't really know and I can make smart decisions. And that I can start relying upon other people to assess, is that a good formula for helping me safe online? Or is that going to negotiate or whatever? I'm trying to make it so that this individual is able to gain access to that stuff. But I recognize that we are this person and we are this person.
Yeah. So it needs to be a completely symmetrical diagram, but also the reason that pseudonymity needs to be the default is that
Thank you, Jesslyn.
is that 99% of people who try to use these systems don't have the experience and the knowledge to understand that pseudonymity is important. And so if we make pseudonymity the default, they will sort of find themselves pseudonymous to begin with, be able to do the progressive disclosure, and then gradually learn those habits.
Yeah.
Whereas if we
And they'll learn those habits
start them
and
out
they'll
on
build those
Facebook,
tools.
where Facebook requires your written name,
Yeah.
they're going to assume that's how the world works, and they're going to be victimized as a result.
And that is us being in the toddler era of the internet
Exactly,
still.
exactly.
We just got the ability to publish, and we're like, I can publish.
We just
and
invented the cookie.
And publication, there's a flip side to publication, which is control over how far we want that to get distributed. I think about this as freedom of speech.
It's not just publication, right? It's also taking services that have never been online before. So stores and banks and investment accounts and so on. Those were never online before.
Yeah.
You had to go into the bank. There was a certain amount of protection.
But as soon as those get put online,
as soon as you put them online, and online creates new vulnerabilities, these unsophisticated people need to be protected by default by the people.
Let me broaden the definition of publication a bit. You're entering a password into a field as a form of publication. It might not be public.
I don't think you need to make that generalization. I think that you're right that not entering a password because we shouldn't have passwords, but authenticating with an online service is the thing that introduces the vulnerability. And that's the thing that should be synonymous to, by default at the beginning of the relationship. And that means we need to have progressive disclosure so that you can then take that initial relationship and you can make it richer over time as you trust.
And I totally agree with that. I guess part of the reason that I'm trying to do the reputation stuff so that progressive disclosure dance doesn't have to be a personal one every time. I mean, it is a personal one to some extent, but you can lead your way into deeper trust because there are communities that you deeply trust.
That's certainly true. So you're
represented by that.
you're trying to model something that we've always done in human culture, and that's a good thing because it's what makes human culture work.
In terms of forgetting the old data, it's never going to go away.
Not anymore.
That node.
I wouldn't even say downgrade. I wouldn't even say downgrade. It could be a place where you keep track of that.
He means discount.
But it could be a place where you keep track of that, and that this person.
That's right. That's what I was just going to say.
When you bring that up, is like that asshole's bringing this stuff up.
Reputation is not something that can be computed by that guy.
It may not.
Reputation is.
I haven't thought about the interaction between.
Always context dependent.
Yeah.
I haven't thought
So
about
what
that.
he can provide is an attestation of certain.
Yes.
And then it's up to each. And so you may have have two services offered by this guy up here. One is simply attestation of claims, and the other one is, hey, I've got this selection of algorithms that I'll let you use if you don't want to run them on your own server.
Right. And the third service is actually that's got to be there.
What?
It's reporting a violation.
Well, that's one of the claims.
That's a claim.
Well, maybe that comes later.
So I'll say this. I think you do have, these are essentially like places where there's data.
Yeah.
Data stored.
Yeah.
And some of the data that's stored there may be references to other data or interpretations, ways of weighting things, or which attributes to factor in, which sources trust. There's metadata.
Yeah.
And I end up not just grabbing the raw stuff, I end up grabbing it and compiling it in some way that helps me make
I
sense.
guess
So
I
if
would
this is
worry.
TRW, you're saying he has both the record of your on-time payments and your cycle score. So he's got both the raw data and he's got a distillation.
Sure.
By a recognized and known
Well,
algorithm.
and a lot of times, in my vision of how this stuff plays out,
Just so you know.
okay,
Thank you.
in my vision of how this stuff plays out, a big player in this down the line are actually data synthesizers, not data brokers, synthesizers, where I'm willing to let that person see a bunch of raw stuff. Part of the agreement is they only let synthesized stuff out.
And you understood what I was saying, but we need to be paying these people.
Yes, totally.
This relying claim, but this.
Yeah.
This
There has to be
this-
micropayment stuff.
I don't know micropayments.
There should be
but
some mechanism
there has
for
to be
getting them.
a fiduciary responsibility
Yes.
or relationship because otherwise it doesn't work.
Yeah,
Yeah,
totally agree.
and actually, the most likely person to pay in this particular scenario is the guy on the left.
Right? There is no will. This is symmetrical to that.
Well, it's not.
We
It's
all
my
need-
reputation, and this guy's checking it.
The only
In this particular transaction,
the
this is
only
not
yeah, that's right. The only asymmetry is who is the initiator.
There's a direction there. There's a direction.
And you're right that
Yeah.
you're right that, but I think it's true that both the initiator and the service, whatever that is, whether it's an individual or company, they both need to have a reputation provider
I guess-
has a fiduciary responsibility to them.
I'm not sure I would pick a reputation provider
Sure.
that kept all of my the
No, I
history
think you want a whole
complaints.
ecosystem of reputation providers.
Well, yeah, I mean, but you know, you're saying that stuff doesn't disappear and the guy just provides it all to somebody to evaluate on their own. Well, that's exactly the problem that I forgot her name now. I was worried about.
Sure.
She wants, in some communities, there should be this automatic.
She cannot control.
Well,
What-
I'm not saying you can't
what
find
weight-
it somewhere else, but there's no reason the reputation service has to provide that.
Bear with me. She has no control over what algorithm a particular community uses.
That's true.
To
That's
take
true.
the facts that are out there
That's
and
true.
synthesize a reputation. She only has control over what she does today.
And that could
and
include
so-
whether or not she's willing to interact with
And
that
so
community.
That's
if
true.
she wants to go to a community and join it, and the community says no, that's just not something that she can control.
No, I
That's
agree.
right.
I
She
agree,
can't-
but she
yeah.
can choose not to join it.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
All right.
Well, it's not that the community. It's not that the community kept data around forever. It's that
So they're combining.
data that is being.
Yes. Well, yes.
That's unfair in her opinion.
Unfair,
She should
so
join
that's
that.
bad community.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yay.
This is wonderful stuff.
I think we're saying the same thing. The data's always going to be there. I agree with that. I'm not going to get rid of it.
No.
The question is whether the normal operation of the community.
And now you have me on camera yelling at people.
Yeah.
Passion.
Thanks for bringing up.
Yeah, that's IAW will do that to us. That's loud.